And in the past few weeks, my interpretation of the Odyssey has caused a lot of problems. I guess a lot of people annoyed with the way that I interpret the movie. A lot of people saying that I'm getting it wrong, getting it the opposite. That although I say that this is kind of a tricky movie, where you could say that certain progressive or certain woke kind of tropes, story tropes, and the kind of inverted story trope that we've been seeing in the past few decades, the kind of political messaging that we've been annoyed with in the past few decades in movies. That my contention is that this is a cover for a more powerful story, which is the story of the return of the father, the return of the king, the return of the husband, the elevation of the son. And that by using these kind of external means that people expect from modern movies, Nolan is able to smuggle in a powerful story about a hero and about a great man that is able to do these great things and go back home and connect to his wife despite some of the other horrible things that he's done. There's even been a recent interview with Nolan that people are pointing to me and saying, "Here, this proves that you're wrong. This proves that you're wrong." Where he was interviewed by this Asian woman, and in it he says that you have to apologize for greatness, or else people will reject it. And people take this as a way of proving that I'm wrong, and I just find it funny because he sees me saying what I'm saying, which is that if you want people to accept greatness, apologize for it, and then present greatness. And although you kind of need to do this in order to get people to accept greatness, what it does is it ultimately makes people accept greatness. So I just find it funny the way people think about it. So, but what I thought we could do today, a very important thing that I think that we should do, which is to compare the Odyssey to the Masters of the Universe. Because the Masters of the Universe is, of course, this movie that came out this year. It was a horrible commercial flop. It really bombed at the box office for all kinds of reasons. But I think that the Masters of the Universe, because I wasn't going to watch it, but I had this insight. That this particular movie is exactly what people are saying about the Odyssey, which is a movie that in its outer appearance is trying to show a kind of traditional adventure with a hero, a strong man who is, kind of this image of masculinity, obviously He-Man, but that ultimately it is rather a kind of very thin wrapper in order to put in a postmodern message that mocks masculinity, that mocks heroism, that mocks, all of the things that people care about, and mocks the relationship between the father and the son, between all of that. And so, if we compare the two, I think you will see, how the Odyssey is different from the He-Man story. Now, you don't have to watch this movie. Seriously, it's not a good movie, but it's very transparent. It's very visible to see what it is that it's trying to do. And we're going to look at a few key things that will help you understand the difference between the kind of politicized, politically motivated messaging that we've been seeing in the past few decades and the more traditional story that I think the Odyssey is ultimately telling. And so the first thing is, the relationship between the outer and the inner. And so one of the things that happened during the Odyssey marketing, that they put a lot of emphasis on the diversity part, on these actors and these characters that are barely there in the movie. And so people freaked out and thought this is going to be extremely political and extremely message. But then when they went and saw it, it ended up not being what people expected. Elliot Page wasn't playing Achilles. Ellen of Troy is a very minor character in this version of the Odyssey, and even the tropes, as I've analyzed in my own interpretation, the tropes seem to flip that in the other direction. In the He-Man story, what you have is these specific scenes of like very action-oriented, muscle-bound scenes of fighting. And these are the scenes that a lot of people are kind of attracted to and were, let's say, seduced by. But then if you look at what's behind the external aspect of this very masculine man, wearing the iron cross on his chest, what you see behind it is very much the opposite, And so we can look at some of the things that are different. One of the things to notice in recent kind of politicized message type movies is that the guy never gets the girl. That's really important. It's very important that the guy doesn't get the girl in the movie. And it's important that the characters go their own way at the end and don't actually end up forming a couple. You've been seeing this happen over and over in the recent movies. The last Guardian of the Galaxy movie was, to me, one of the most egregious, where it would have made so much sense to finally have a reconciliation of these two characters, the two main characters that had been at odds for all kinds of reasons, had forgotten each other, had found each other again. You would have made so much sense for them to come together at the end, but no, you cannot have that. And in the Odyssey, the whole movie moves towards the union of Odysseus and his wife. The entire dramatic drive brings you into that point. In the Masters of the Universe, you have exactly the incel moment where He-Man character comes up to the Tila character. They knew each other when they were children. They were separated and they found each other again. Now they're on this adventure together. It makes so much sense that they would fall in love with each other, that they would find each other. But no, the He-Man character comes up to her in a kind of a seductive pose, and she flatly rejects him. She pushes him away and puts him in the friend zone. That is one of the first things to notice in the difference between the two. The other difference is, one of the aspects of the modern storytelling is, if you have a somewhat heroic character that is there, a male character, you always need to have a female character that is there to remind you of how ridiculous the male character is. And this is something that in the Masters of the Universe is just annoying and embarrassing the entire time. You have this Tila character that is there with the He-Man character, and it's constantly, they show her face, her mocking, her cynicism, her little comments, all through the entire movie.
You don't recognize me?
Huh?
Still such a squink.
And you see the same with this other female character, the female robot character that is turned into a maid by Man-at-Arms. And Man-at-Arms turns out this female robot character, who is the most powerful thing in the universe, is turned into a maid by the Man-at-Arms character, who's now become obviously a drunk and a loser. And ultimately, he's kind of forced to turning this character back into a warrior. And this robot character is constantly showing up, making fun of, and making ridiculous the other male characters. And so this is very much a trope.
You had a name for yourself too, didn't you?
No.
Yeah, you did. Come on. Tell us.
You're gonna laugh.
Probably, but tell us.
He-Man.
What?
That's worse than I thought it was going to be.
Now, when you look at in the Odyssey, you have none of that kind of stuff. You have nothing like that. You do have Clytemnestra, who kills her husband. You do have Helen, who gets in the fight and is arguing with her husband Menelaus. But ultimately, all that is pointing us towards the beautiful relationship between Odysseus and Penelope, and how they will find each other again at the end. And so the entire structure of the characters, and even though Penelope has her moment where she's angry that she is, that she's a woman and that she can't rule, but she still, even in that moment where she complains that because she's a woman, she can't rule, she still ends her speech with a desire for her husband to return and to take the throne. And when he does return, ultimately it is the son that takes the throne. And so even though there are these movements towards the kind of messaging that we're used to hearing in movies, they get turned around and brought back to a more powerful storytelling and a kind of a more ancient version of the story. Now, of course, this is exactly the opposite in the Masters of the Universe movie, where everything gets turned, every gesture of heroism or masculinity gets turned into mockery. There are constant references to how, in fact, the He-Man world is the fantasy world of the insecurities of a man. And therefore, a man has these insecurities and therefore develops a fantasy world of what masculinity is and what heroism is, and lives in that fantasy world. And this fantasy world is a way to make up for his insecurities and his weakness. And this is constantly harped at in the entire structure, where there are all these jokes about how the sword and the power are basically stand-ins for the guy's Johnson, and that ultimately he's ashamed of his body and ashamed of the size of himself. And there's even the very last scene in the movie shows the He-Man character, as Adam, going to change to become He-Man, and all the other guys are there saying he always wants to hide himself to change, and he never wants to change in front of us. And alluding at the very end of the movie, when the movie is all finished, that all of this is about male insecurity and about kind of over-the-top compensation for the types of insecurities that men have. Now, this is, of course, again, this is the opposite of what the Odyssey does. Hello, everyone. We are going to have a Symbolic World Summit in Oxford, September 24th to the 26th. When, the Pusey House asked us to come and host an event there, we couldn't say no, but we're so excited about the people we're able to bring there. So you can start and tell us what's going on.
Right. So the theme for this summit is Paradise Imagined. And we are going to be looking at different depictions of paradise, of the Garden of Eden, of heaven, of the earthly paradise, throughout ancient and medieval literature. We have an incredible lineup. Dr. Martin Shaw will be there telling us stories. We'll have Aidan Hart, Father Jacob Siemens, Father Andrew Stephen Damick, yourself, myself. It's going to be just an incredible event. And it won't all just be talks. We're going to spend some time in Pusey House, hearing stories and doing lectures and so on. But then we're going to also spend a lot of time around Oxford. So if you've ever wanted to go and do the Oxford things, go to C.S. Lewis's house and drink in the pubs and get a tour of the town and things like this. Like if you've ever wanted to do the Oxford thing, think about, you could do it with Martin Shaw. Obviously, of course, me and Jonathan, but come on, bumming around Oxford with Dr. Martin Shaw. Can you imagine anything better than that?
Yeah. And it's only 150 tickets. So it's going to be very intimate. That's why we don't have like a VIP. Everybody will all be together. And a lot of people are going to be there. Paul Kingsnorth is coming. Heather Pollington will be there. Also, even Mary Harrington is going to come. And there's a lot of other people that are going to come that are not the official speakers, but we're all going to be, it's going to be an amazing time with all these people together.
Yeah, so we know it's a weird time in the world right now to travel and everything else, but if you can possibly make it, I think this will be an incredible event. And again, it's a small event. There's actually a lot of risk putting on an event this small, but I'm just really excited about it. So I hope you'll join us.
Odyssey does. The Odyssey goes directly into the insecurities and the difficulties of the ambitions of men. When Odysseus hears the song of the sirens, he tells us clearly about the contradictions and the difficulties of what men's desires bring them to do and what their ambition brings them to sacrifice. And then ultimately, though, at the end, he is able in some ways to, you could say, engage with that, repent of his excesses, and ultimately reconcile himself with himself, and finally return home and is willing to do what needs to be done in order to clean up his house and to return to his wife. And so it doesn't mean that there isn't an allusion to masculine insecurity, but the direction is in the other way. The direction in the Masters of the Universe movie is we're going to show this very, very flashy, ridiculous aspect of masculinity, this warrior, He-Man, whatever, man at arms, and all these kind of silly, stupid, excessively masculine names. But what we're going to do is that we're going to show that behind that is really male fantasy, male power fantasy, and male insecurity. Now, you can see that they both have both, right? In one shows one side and the other. The Odyssey shows one side and the other, but in the Odyssey, the direction is towards the reconciliation and the capacity for the man to reconcile himself. And it's very interesting because in terms of the both movies, this is something that I've been talking about now, is that we have to go away from fantasy. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with fantasy. I have my own fantasy characters, fictional characters that I love, but in He-Man, they catch something right, which is that there's a problem with fantasy. There's a problem with fantasy because what fantasy can become is a replacement for true valor, right? That the comic book guy the gamer guy, this is a real character that in some ways compensates for his lack of true adventure in life with these fantasy types adventures. And so that is why I think what's interesting about the two movies is that one is the kind of ridiculous, over the top version of fantasy that He-Man was. This kind of unapologetically, dumb barbarian, excessive masculinity, over the top masculinity. Whereas the other one, the Odyssey, is our story. The other one is our story. The Odyssey is not a fantasy, no matter how many people are trying to say that this is a kind of fantasy movie. The Odyssey is our story. The Odyssey is one of the stories on which the West is based. The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, these are the memories of our people that kind of show us what heroism is and the problems with heroism and all the sacrifices that people make. And therefore, it's interesting that on the one hand, you have this fantasy adventure, and on the other hand, you actually have the memory of an ancient myth, but an ancient story that is considered to be the foundation of our story. One is ultimately revealing the danger of fantasy, the problem of these excessive kind of fantastical worlds, how they can become compensation, how entertainment itself can become compensation for doing something, right? There's nothing wrong with entertainment, but entertainment is very dangerous because it can make you feel like you're doing something when you're not doing anything. That's also one of the reasons why I've admired actors for some reason for so long. Actors in ancient world, actors were considered the bottom of the social world. They're considered kind of like the least of men because their entire life is pretending to be something else. And the fact that we are so enamored by entertainment also means that we let ourselves get, hypnotized by fantasy worlds. Whereas what we need to do is to remember, is to go home, is to return to the origin. The nostalgia that Prince Adam feels in the Master of the Universe is similar to the nostalgia that is felt by Odysseus in the Odyssey. And in the movie Masters of the Universe, his nostalgia is presented as this fantasy world is your real world. This normal world, this regular world where you go work and you do that's fake. That's not the real world. The real world is this fantasy world. And the whole movie kind of plays with that duality, which is on the one hand, they show that the fantasy world is true, but they keep harping that even though it's true in the movie, in parenthesis, it is also a kind of fake supplement for the insecurities of the male character. Now, there are so many things in the Masters of the Universe movie that show what it really is. When Adam in the real world tries to take the sword from the barbarian statue that is holding it in the comic shop, right? He's trying to become that barbarian. He's trying to kind of enter into the fake world of the fantasy Frazetta type barbarian. They literally show him as if he's being sodomized by the character. And people, for some reason, don't see it. They don't see it. They're watching this guy acting as if he's being sodomized by this barbarian. And at the same time thinking that this is some kind of great, this great He-Man character. It's really ridiculous. And in the movie, one of the big differences, of course, about the Odyssey and Masters of the Universe is that in the Odyssey, the entire story is about the reconciliation between the son and the father, right? You know what happens in Masters of the Universe? The son kills his father because he can't control his power. So because he can't control his power, the He-Man character literally kills his own father. And although they show it with all this like compassion and sympathy that he's there with his father as his father is dying, his father who mocked him as a child and did all that, he killed his father because he can't control his male power. And so, folks, that is what a message-driven, nonsense, kind of politically ideological movie looks like when they try to wrap it around and put it into a kind of supposedly heroic masculine vision. And the Odyssey in my very humble opinion, is what it looks like when you do the opposite. Which it looks like when you, at the forefront, you put out these images that look like they're messaging and ideological and political, but ultimately inside you put the real structure and the real relationship of the family, of the husband and the wife, of the restoration of the father and the restoration of the husband. And so you might not agree with me on the Odyssey part, but, at least now you'll get a sense, and you probably will try to avoid watching this horrible movie called Masters of the Universe. May they make no sequel to it. May they please not continue this franchise, and please just let it die, and let some of these ridiculous fantasy type stories die. And you better hope, folks, that they never make a Warhammer 40,000 whatever movie. Because if they make it, they will make it like this He-Man movie, because of its excessive violence and its over-the-top image of war and of heroism and of kind of excessive masculinity. The only way they're going to give that to you is if underneath there is actually contempt and hate and mockery of everything that is masculine. Let us rather remember the real stories, and remember the story that have brought us where we are, those that are more complex, that are more subtle, that do have regret and do have a criticism of masculinity and of heroism in them, but that ultimately can reconcile us to that greatness and to that masculinity and to that heroism. So I hope this has been useful, to think about, and please don't watch Masters of the Universe. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully this was helpful for you, and I'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.